All right, we'll go ahead and get started. 7:01 according to my clock. Thank you everybody for joining us this evening. We appreciate you joining us here for another History at Home on Thursday evenings. The Crested Butte Mountain Heritage Museum really enjoys putting on this programming, but we always need support to be able to do this and the many other things that we do. So if you would like to become a member to support us or to make a donation, you can go to crestedbuttemuseum.com. Tonight I'd like to get started with just a short land acknowledgement. The museum recognizes that we are guests here on this land, historically Ute territory. We acknowledge that the mining and ranching community that established itself at the end of the 1800s was at the expense of the Uncompahgre Ute and the Tabawatch Ute, who were forcibly removed from this area due to the Bruneau Treaty and the manipulation that followed. We hope that you will take time to visit our neighbor, the Ute Museum, located in Montrose, Colorado, with exhibits developed in partnership with the Ute Tribes by History Colorado, our state historic society. While we could never do this history justice, we do include information about Paleo Indians of the Gunnison Valley, the Ute people, the Bruneau Treaty, and the Los Pinos Indian Agency in our exhibits. The Crested Butte Mountain Heritage Museum knows that we have a great responsibility in representing many stories from our history, good and bad, and we continue to listen to those voices when they are ready to share. This program is being recorded, so if anybody wants to share this with their friends or rewatch later, or if our internet goes out halfway through and you want to see the first half, then you can find the recording later on at crestedbuttemuseum.com, where you can also find all the recordings that we've done so far in our History at Home series, as well as a plethora of other videos. And yeah, more on that later. Let's see, next week is Thanksgiving, so we don't have any History at Home next Thanksgiving. Everybody gets to enjoy their own history and hopefully chat with their families, virtually, and if you're lucky enough to be with them, then focus on that and get away from the computer next Thursday. So nothing next Thursday. Also, there's been a slight change to our History at Home planning. Dwayne Vandenbush has gotten in touch with us and he'd like to do a History of Crested Butte series that will begin at the end of January. We're still kind of nailing down some of the specifics. So our History at Home is going to end a little early at end of January, but we still have some great speakers coming your way, and then we'll kick it off with Dwayne. A huge thank you to our speakers tonight, Galen and Mike, for joining us. I am so excited to hear about the making of this film, as well as, all the stories that went into it. And with that, I'll hand it off to you guys if you want to introduce yourselves and also the film.
Will do. Thanks, Nell. And many thanks to the Crested Butte Museum for putting this series on. I'm also a board member at the museum and really passionate about everything the museum is about and what Nell and Shelley and the whole staff, they work tirelessly to keep the museum going and adapting adapting to the pandemic with series like this. It's a great way to stay engaged with people and share stories. So we're honored to be here tonight. So my name's Mike Horn. I live in Crested Butte. Been here for about 20 years or so, and I always been passionate about riding bicycles. Never a pro rider or racer or anything like that, but bikes have been a part of my life for a long time, and really passionate about the community and the history of the valley. And Born from Junk was really just unexpected opportunity to take a deep dive into mountain bike history and discover some stories that we didn't even really know existed when it came to the history of mountain biking. And so, in terms of my role in the project, this is the first documentary film I've ever been involved in. And, it's a really rewarding project, while also really challenging. But I'm the writer, co-director, kind of producer, really kind of whatever it takes to get the job done. And I think we and all ended up taking on roles that we didn't even know maybe existed, as we took a deep dive in this project, from putting fake mustaches on people to graying their hair and whatever else. So it's been a really fun project, and it took about 3 years to complete. And yeah, ultimately, it's we're just really happy to get it out into the world, and it's a funky time to be putting a film out there, given the nature of the pandemic and the fact that we can't be watching this together somewhere right now, but we're making the best of it. And one of the advantages, I think, as Nell was saying in the beginning, is that we're able to uh, reach and engage with people far and wide. So that's been really fun. And I'll hand it off to Galen here for a quick intro as well.
Sure. My name is Galen Foley. I live in Burlington, Vermont. I'm a director and cinematographer by trade, and I know Mike through the agency that we run, a creative agency called Buttery, that we've been doing for about, 8, 9 years now, something like that. So I've been doing work out in Crested Butte with Mike for probably the past 5 years now. And over that time, I've kind of become really connected with the community and the landscape and everything about it. And every time we get the opportunity to tell a story about the area, I'm always jumping to do it because it's just such a cool area. And I love being out there. It's just an excuse to hang out in a really cool spot. Not to say that, I like Vermont as well, but it's much bigger out there and just a really cool community. So I'm always happy to be out there and feel very welcome in the community. And yeah, as far as my role in the project, like Mike, wore a lot of hats, co-directed, shot a lot of the narrative, well, none of the narrative. We worked with another person on that, shot all the documentary, and then I edited it as well. And as Mike said, I was the man who put the mustaches on. So didn't think I'd be doing that job, but that's what I did. So yeah, that touches on the roles I did and kind of brief history of what I did. I mean, I started in the ski film world and then migrated into doing sort of branded content and storytelling, short form documentaries. But like Mike, this is also my first step into doing a medium form documentary, one that we're really just following the story and not so much maybe trying to check boxes for a client and tell a brand story. This is really following where we felt like the story was going to lead us, and we're really happy with where we ended up.
Yeah, and I guess on that front, this is maybe something that would be better at the end, but this project is just, I think, opened my eyes certainly to just different ways and to tell stories and to share other people's stories that they might not care about talking about themselves or propping themselves up, but sometimes you stumble onto something that nobody really knew about, and it's been really gratifying to essentially share stories that people weren't out trying to promote themselves. They were just doing their thing, and after 40 something years for some of them, this is the first time these stories have really been told in this kind of venues. So it's been really fun.
Yeah, should we dive maybe into kind of how this came to be? I mean, you're kind of getting there, but
yeah. What are you telling me, Galen? Speed it up a little bit?
Speed the lead a little bit.
So yeah, to that point, we didn't plan on doing a narrative documentary project when we first started digging into this. We were planning on doing a short series of videos on the history of Crested Butte and the Gunnison Valley, in terms of mountain biking. And we knew from this, the stories we had read and seen out in the world already, that this is a story that had been told in varying degrees. And it was something that we had watched very different documentaries talking about some of this era and things like that. But what we realized is like people hadn't really gone to the beginning. And that's really where we tried our hardest to dig back to, was the very scratch beginnings of people starting to drag bikes up into the mountains and ride them down. And, it was really interesting because, simultaneously in Marin County, there was, mountain biking happening, in the early 70s. And it was also happening here, and it just, it was happening in its own way. And in California, a lot of the folks who got involved in some of the earlier days, not necessarily the earliest days, but the mid 70s, give or take a couple of years. A lot of them became household names. They stayed with the sport for the rest of their life. You're talking Joe Breeze, Charlie Kelly, folks who made their way here in 1978. These are folks who are still still like the figureheads of mountain biking, and icons to this day. And what we discovered here was, the pioneers and the earliest pioneers in Crested Butte and the Gunnison Valley were really unheralded, kind of unsung hero types, folks that just went and did it. And they didn't talk a whole lot about it. They didn't build businesses around it. They just did it. And then, and for a lot of them, they didn't even get into modern mountain biking as we know it today. They, for some of them, they were kind of done with their, mountain riding, by the time 1980 came around. And so what we really, tried to dig deep into is what started happening in the early 70s, and then taking that on through the early to mid 80s, when some of the stories, started to blend with other things that were going on around the country. What am I missing there, Galen?
You kind of touched on pretty much all of it. Yeah, maybe dive into, maybe just play the trailer for now. We can talk a little bit more about the style of the film and some of the kind of how we broke down the story.
Yeah, that sounds good. So yeah, more or less, once we started doing the interviews, we realized we were on to something much bigger than we initially planned on, and we just followed the story where it took us. And 3 years later, here we are with Born from Junk. So
cool. Let me cue that up. I think we are. Is that the right one there, Horn?
That's the one.
Beautiful. All right. Cool. Well, yeah. So this is the trailer, and then we'll dive back in and talk more about kind of our approach.
Mountain biking never brought me fame or fortune like many of the folks I'd met during the years of invention and the decades that followed. For the people I rode with from the beginning, it was never about anything more than having a good time. In one revolution, it became bigger than any one of us, any company, or any place on the map. It always was. We just pushed our bikes up a little higher than the rest. But I'm glad I was there when it happened, when the wheels started turning and everything was new and done just for the fun of it. When every ride was a journey into the unknown. When you didn't know if your Frankenstein bike would survive the ride, and you didn't care. Every time I think about those early rides, rallying my clunker down a mountain pass with the sun setting at my back and a future full of possibility down the road, I can't help but smile and shake my head. And then I go ride my bike.
Cool.
Right on. Yeah. So there's the trailer. So I guess we can talk a little bit about, the style of the film and why we ended up going in the direction that we did. I think out of the gate, and this is maybe a lesson learned for future projects, is we didn't really do an assessment of like what kind of footage might be available to produce a project like this. We just went for it, and it turns out there's not a whole lot of video footage out there. Well, none of that we found anyway, of kind of this outlaw era um, in the mid to late 70s in Crested Butte, in terms of these folks weren't dragging a cinematographer around with them to document what they were doing. They were just going out and doing it. And we're fortunate that there were some folks who had cameras out there, like Bob Starr, who is part of the Grub State Gang, one of the OGs, as we like to call him, and he's 80 years old now, lives in Crested Butte, and is amazing, and is in this film. But he also happened to be snapping some photos as they went, in the early and mid 70s, and that's the only reason we have really any documentation of Al Mons building some of the first bikes that they sourced out of the junkyard, and some of the early rides up in the mountains when they were just messing around. Some of them were in snow. They were blowing up all over the place on these on these Frankenstein bikes that they were building, but they were having a blast doing it. I think the other part of it is that, the lack of footage aside, the narrative style allowed us to kind of communicate the outlaw vibe and find a way to find a way to take the stories that we were gathering from all these folks we were interviewing, and we and use those to inspire these narrative scenes. And so they were recreations, some parts literal, some parts just inspired by what we were hearing. And so the recreations and the characters were based off of the people that we met throughout the project.
Yeah, and for folks too that maybe haven't seen it yet, what Mike is speaking about is we kind of broke it's not your traditional documentary in the sense that it's just interviews and archival assets. The way we chose to approach it, due to some of these limitations that Mike's talking about, is to recreate some narrative sequences as well. So we worked with, not real actors, actually. We worked with folks that were passionate about the sport and passionate about that time period. And we recreated these scenes that we felt would help add to the, show the culture that was going on, and kind of fill in the gaps that we felt like we couldn't show due to lack of having these, photos and videos that in an ideal scenario would have existed. So we created these narrative sequences to help tell the story and kind of help ground the viewer as well. So you're following somebody throughout this kind of time period. Mm-hmm. Sorry, you can jump back in there, Mike.
No. So yeah, and even as we casted folks and tried to recreate these scenes, we Austin Weaver is the lead character in the film that we follow throughout, and we just happened to meet him just by chance, and it's his story is so interesting. He's like a Renaissance clunker man. Like he's today he for one, he spearheads the Pro Pass tour, which is a bike tour over Pro Pass to Aspen that's been going on since the first one was in 1976. And so he's carrying that torch today, but he's also a clunker mechanic. Like he's just like Al Mons and the gang in 1974. Here in 2020, Austin builds all kinds of clunkers and bikes for people and for friends. And when people are coming out to do the tour, he'll build bikes for them. And I don't even know how we met him, but he ended up just being the perfect character. Despite, like Galen said, these aren't, union actors. These are just characters we met who were gracious enough to be part of this project. And, Austin makes incredible bikes. And, when he showed up here, like to work and be part of the film, like he showed up with a truck full of bikes and tools. And, he's just so passionate about it. And it's really cool to see it, see that spirit carried on, from the earliest days of folks building bikes to today, and still that passion lives on, and that passion of innovation and just having fun. So
yeah, should we maybe play that first narrative, and
yeah,
we can kind of break that down from there?
Yeah, that sounds good. So this is the opening of the film, right?
Yes, indeedy. I can pull it up. Cool. I think I've got it. Cool. Yeah. So this is the opening of the film. It's kind of the first narrative, Act One. And here we go. Oh, maybe not.
Is it possible to know in the moment when something big is happening? Does anyone in the middle of a movement ever see that movement in real time? Maybe, but I sure didn't. I never saw it coming. 1, 2, 3, 4! We set the wheels in motion without any purpose or plan at all. We were just a bunch of outlaws with too much time on our hands and a couple million acres of wild country to explore.
We're walking through the honky-tonk like a pack of wolves now. Order up around the crowd. Come on, we're almost there.
I knew better than to push that beater Chevy so high and so hard, but I did it anyway. So there I was, 10 miles from town, and I hadn't seen another person all afternoon. I cursed my bad luck in that piece of shit truck. Then, the boys showed up.
We're gonna save our clunkers for a ride. Why don't you throw your bike in the back? All right.
Turns out the end of that old Chevy was the beginning of everything. Rugged mining roads were scratched into the steep slopes of every river valley across the West Elk Mountains. It was on those roads where the Grubstake gang began to push the boundaries of what was possible on a bike.
Have a good ride, boys. We'll see you at the bottom.
Last one to the truck by his first round at the Grubstake.
I've been holding it in through the whole work week. Now it's Saturday night and I'm about to roll. It's Saturday night, I need the motherfucker.
On that first night, I had a hell of a ride. But none of us knew, or really cared, how far it would go.
It's Saturday night, I need to blow some.
Is it
Well, we made it almost way there.
really cared where it would go?
It's Saturday night, I need to blow some
Cool. Almost made it all the way through.
We're doing good for it. We're doing good for the internet. So like I think Gail and I have talked about, we broke it into sections. We broke the story up into sections, to kind of carry us through different parts of the history. And the opener there is, really trying to, channel that to almost kind of manifest destiny, sort of, anything can happen type of vibe. You're out for a drive out in the hills, your truck breaks down, the next thing you know, you get picked up by a truck full of like-minded folks, and you're all of a sudden part of the the birth of mountain biking. And that's, often how things like that start. It's just this pursuit of fun in the mountains, a little bit of chance, a little bit of luck, things come together, and without even knowing it, you're part of something. And it's the lack of effort, and there, nobody was trying to do anything. And I think that was, one of the best parts of the story for us. They were just doing it. Um, I guess, in terms of, some of the fun stuff, like the trucks, you see all that, all the gathering of the props was definitely part of the journey for us. Not to get super granular on how it all came together, but we just found ourselves connecting with all kinds of folks to source era appropriate trucks, for example, which was uh, not super easy. Even here in Colorado, where vehicles don't rust like they do where I'm from out east originally. Finding vehicles that like could work for that era, not look too new, too old. We did our best to pull that off.
And getting them where we needed to go too, because not only that, it was, because for me, Mike and I were working on this for a long time prior to actually shooting to try to make sure everything was going to work out just right. And for me being back east, talking to him just through the internet, kind of like we are now, I'd have this idea in my head of exactly what I wanted, where I wanted to be. And then we would have to figure out how to get this, first of all, how do you get that truck? And then how the heck do you get that truck up to that spot, which is, even a modern day car wouldn't get up there unless you were, lifted. So that was a whole other thing, was trying to, and it's not too hard out in Colorado because there's so much open space, fortunately. But trying to get those views that felt kind of timeless, that felt like they could be back in the 70s, back in the 80s. That was a whole other challenge that we had to overcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, we owe a huge pile of thanks to, just a ton of people who, you know, both the folks who lent us the trucks did it for free. I can't believe they let us take them, frankly. And it's one was a '57 Chevy, and I believe the other one was like a late '60s Ranger, and they were like, just fill it up with gas when you bring it back, which is kind of the old school Crest Butte way, which was a fun part of the process. And then yeah, in terms of pulling together like the costuming, the funny thing about Austin, the lead character, is that's kind of just how he dresses every day. And so he wears a t-shirt and jeans, and he kind of had that timeless look going. But yeah, we ended up, putting some mustaches on some people and trying to, pull together era appropriate clothes. And at a certain point we had, when we shot all the bikes, we must have had like 25 or 30 different bikes at the house that, ranged from pre-war clunkers to, funky 80s bikes and kind of everything in between. So we got to see a lot of cool stuff and ride some too.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Side of it was just seeing, especially because I think over the course of 2 days, maybe we shot in kind of a studio style setting in your garage.
Yeah.
20 odd bikes. So to see them, handle them, and just anywhere from, like you're saying, pre-war clunkers to we shot some of Doug's Manitou bikes from, that looked like spaceships compared to the clunkers. Just such a vast difference. So it was such an interesting way to see how the sport changed.
Yeah. And to that point, just how quickly, it went from literally being, reclaiming bikes from the junkyard and just piecing stuff together. And, by the time we're getting into, whatever, late '70s, early '80s, there's, starting to be purpose-built bikes for the mountains. I wouldn't quite call them mountain bikes yet, but people were trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of stories too that didn't quite make it into this, but speak to that side of things. I'm so the tune-up. Why do I always space on his name?
Chris Haas.
Chris Haas had some
Yeah.
fascinating stories.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. He was a character that he's like one of those unsung heroes. Chris Haas from Gunnison. He started the tune up, and he started telling us stories about. There's one really good story that I'll tell you in 1 second once I ramble through a couple other things. But he's another one of these characters that wasn't promoting himself, but happened to be late 70s, early 80s. Collaborating with people and starting to build bikes, and build is maybe using the term loosely, like they were using 2x4s to, stretch out the rear triangle. And Chris has this amazing story that we still need to figure out a way to give it its proper treatment. But, he had a friend whose dad was a dentist, and and at the shop, they didn't, at his bike shop, they didn't have a lot of tools, especially like the fine drilling tools and things they needed to retrofit some of these bikes. And so they would go to his friend's dad's dentist office in the middle of the night, and they would use the dental tools to work on the bikes. And that was how they were building clunkers. And it was just, you're just picturing that, right? Like you picture people in the dentist office in the middle of the night drilling out holes and trying to clean everything up before folks come in for dental work the next day. So that's just one small example of the many like incredible stories we heard. And we still have a lot of stories, I think, to tell beyond this film. So yeah, Chris, one of the unsung heroes and one of the nicest people I've met in the Valley for sure. His mind for like the engineering and the way he could envision how all the bikes were built and how they were customizing them. I can only hope to have that kind of memory down the line. So what do you say, Galen? Should we dip into a piece of the documentary here to jump back to the 70s?
Yeah, I'll jump back to the 70s real quick. Cool. Oh, spacebar.
Well, there are only 500 of us here in 75. 500 was a very small town. And that was including the old timers and the newcomers.
Back then, the elevated sidewalks were still here. All the hitching posts for all the horses were along the elevated sidewalks. I mean, it was full-on Western.
It's a hideout. Back then, it was. There were people up here hiding out. They were like wanted. Yeah, it was a rogue town.
When you first came to town, you never asked anybody their last name. You just, if they told you your last name, that was good. But if you didn't ask, because they might not want to tell you.
Well, yeah, I mean, there wasn't a lot of work. We weren't really burdened with responsibilities and stuff.
74 and 75, that's when Albert and Baker started just going to Denver and coming back with pickup trucks load of bikes. Then they would fix them up in the shop, and $15. You had yourself a clunker.
It's like the chosen ones that had the bikes. We made them for our friends.
The guys were called the boys. That was the grubstick gang.
We'd park them in front of the bars, and back them in like motorcycles. Line them up. Man, we want one of those. So that's how we started making a bunch of them. Put the high risers on them. And
we didn't have gears. Gears came later, but and the trail system came later. We were riding the dirt roads with jean jackets and jeans and some boots. No helmet, ball cap, and so that was your biking outfit back there, Lycra back then. So
once we started riding them more and doing more dirt riding, we started putting handbrakes on them and stuff. And but we just made them with tall gears on them for downhill only. Big front sprocket, little back sprocket. There was not too much riding uphill with those. So you get someone that doesn't have a bike to drive the truck and then load the bikes up and take them to the top of Paradise or Kebler or ride them down 100 miles an hour.
Pause it there, Ron.
Yeah, that's good for sure.
Cool. So that's the early days of the story that kind of got us hooked. Those are those conversations we had, those interviews that kind of made us realize there was something that hadn't been told here. And then we just had to dive in and go from there. And then, you know, the story is really unique all the way up, like Mike was saying, up through, you know, up through the 90s, I'd say, or, you know, even mid 80s, maybe, right? Like Fat Tire Bike Week, it was a really unique, interesting kind of trend-setting thing that happened out here. And we chose to follow the story all the way through from, you know, those early 70s, mid 70s, up through right around when we bow out there, Horn, late 80s.
It's like, yeah, midish to late 80s, give or take. You know, and that's as the sport's going from, yeah, like in the, you know, yeah, early to mid 70s, it's this completely just kind of outlaw pursuit. And by the mid 80s, you know, even the early 80s, but especially by the mid 80s, you're getting to a point where it's like getting more formalized, and there's races and more events, and you know, people are, you know, really starting to get turned on to biking in the mountains and on trails all around the country, and I'm sure around the world at that point. You know, it's just, this happens to be the little corner of history that we stumbled upon in terms of you know, the sport's kind of scratch beginnings. So beach, yeah, you know, we were really fortunate, I think, you know, that you know, a lot of these characters were willing to talk to us. You know, like Al, Bob, and Beach, especially. These were folks that, you know, were part of the Grub State gang, as you know, they, you know, maybe informally talked about, but we, you know, decided to talk about them in that way too. You know, and it was just this, you know, gang of fun-loving folks going out and getting after it. And you know, because they weren't the type of folks who were looking to get their name out there, or they weren't invested in it, you know, from a business perspective or branding perspective or anything. Like, you know, we had to kind of chase them, literally chase them down to, and develop relationships with these folks before they were really willing to talk to us. And that was, you know, for me, you know, one of the more gratifying parts of the project was developing relationships with these folks, just to get them comfortable enough to talk to us, because they're not the kind of people that care about being promoted or being known for anything. They're just good, salt of the earth folks, you know, doing what they do. And you know, and so that also added, I think, a layer of accountability and pressure to do the story justice, because these also aren't the kind of people that you want to mess with, you know. And you also you want to do their story justice. And you know, we really we cared and care about that a lot, is we wanted to honor them and honor their stories, and tell them in the best way possible. And so we did our best, and so far they seem pretty happy with the outcome, so we're in good shape so far on that front. But yeah, so what do you think, Galen? Should we show another clip of the doc, or should we talk a little bit about where the film is these days and where it's going? How are we doing on time? Rambling on forever or what? Nell, how are we doing?
Let's see another clip. Let's do it.
Another clip. What do you want to show, Warren?
Let's see. How about should we show the narrative opener to part 2?
Go there. We go Act 2 doc as well.
Yeah, let's go Act 2 doc and dip into that next zone.
Yeah. One moment. Let's see. I take that back. Let's do end of Act 1 into Act 2 narrative. How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good.
We'll start with the California Girl. Might be a hard cut into this. We'll see how this goes.
All right. Buckle up.
Let's see.
Became the place where they came to be a part of what was going on and just comparing notes and looking what other people were doing and just being a part of something. It was like the Woodstock, I guess, of mountain biking at the time.
It was great fun. We were downhillers for the start. And then after the Toro Pass, then we became more uphills because we added gears, because you had to have gears, or else you walked your bike. And we didn't end up, people didn't like walking their bike. They thought that was, you know, it's not gonna work. So gear up and then trail up. And that's where it all melded in together. I think that's a pretty good picture of it, isn't it?
Back then, I was really good at finding things to do that didn't cost money, like wandering the mountains in search of rumored trails and exploring the potential for new ones. Most days, I wouldn't see another person, never mind another biker. And there were times I didn't find a trail at all.
Hey, wait a sec. Austin, that you?
Yeah, man.
Well, get right up here then.
Once the second wave of bikes synced up with single track, there was no turning back. We went from riding narrow slivers of dirt stomped in by horses, cattle, and wildlife to building our own trails in the blink of an eye. Mountain biking had found its flow.
The cows made the first trails, the motorcycles followed the cows, and the bicyclists followed the motorcyclists.
All those trails were there on a map, but they didn't exist in reality. You'd have to go out and find the hash marks that the old CCC crew back in the 30s, left. You'd have to walk all over until you find the next tree that had a hash mark. And then
That seemed a good place to back out.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so we more or less go from, literally, starting to build some of these, first bikes, again, kind of right off the scrap heap. And in a relatively short time frame, people are starting to aspire to kind of go further and higher and deeper into the mountains. How can we get off the roads? How can we get into the wild country, and how can these bikes take us there? And, they're just the innovation, we talked about like the age of invention, it's something I think Chris Haas talks about, the years of invention, where they're building these bikes at first just to get out there. And then they're getting more purpose focused. And they're starting to retrofit these bikes so they can take them deeper into the mountains, and kind of get away from it all, like people like to do when they get outside. And so they became, they went from being this vehicle for just pure downhill outlaw fun, to starting to become a vehicle for taking people into wild places and being used more and more for exploration. And that doesn't mean that they were 28-pound, modern carbon bikes. These are still, 40-pound rigs that people are dragging up to 12,000 feet and whatever else. But this, really was the transition into people trying to take the bikes deeper and further into the mountains and starting to reclaim trails that had either been, game trails laid in by elk, deer, cattle trails, as Chris Haas talks about, the motorcycles were putting trails in, before the bikers as well. And, then the bikers, were like, how can we piece all this together and turn it into a whole ride? And that really spawned the next era of, both discovering trail, and then eventually starting to build trail.
Yeah, and I think one of the names we haven't really mentioned yet would be Don Cook, who I think I paused it right before he comes in, and he's obviously was an integral part in those early days of trails. There's some fascinating stuff about him building, an airplane and using it to scout for trails and kind of spending his free time basically beginning the trail network that a lot of people ride today. And he talks about having that idea of being able to ride 360 degrees around town. He definitely had a vision for what it could be, and I think it's kind of gone there and beyond too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and one of those other little kind of nuggets, like the dentist story, from Don. He talked about how in these, earliest days, kind of maybe early 80s, before Crested Butte Mountain Bike Association. I think Don showed up in the late 70s. And, he was going out with a friend, and they had these European cyclocross shoes that had spikes on the toes. And they were using those shoes to literally scratch in trail. You talk about, the most pristine, scratched in primitive single track you could have, in this era of, and there's everything from, machine built all the way back to community built trails. But they were literally, scratching in trails with their shoes and by hand, and riding it in, and it's just so raw and such a, it was a blank canvas, in terms of any kind of bike trails. So it was just another rare time. And as Galen mentioned, Don was just had a vision, when it began. And if you all know anything about Crested Butte and the Gustin Valley and how many trails there are here now, it's pretty remarkable to see where it's come from that time. So.
Yeah, and it's just another area where kind of Crested Butte was a pioneer, in the bike side of things, which they kind of go unsung in. And then on the trail network side, where definitely there's a lot more credit given for that, having such a robust trail network, and Simba being one of the, if not they are the oldest continuous bike.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there's a long-standing passion, for trails here. Hence, and now it's, one of the best places, if not the best place, to ride a mountain bike in the whole world. So.
Yeah. And so when you look at all those things, it seems kind of like a no-brainer that there would be a documentary on it. And so for us, after, going through and learning all of that, it was so surprising to us, and felt like we needed to do this project just because it hadn't been done before. All this stuff seemed so groundbreaking and so interesting, and all the characters were so rich, that it seemed like a story that needed to be told.
You guys did an excellent job doing it. I remember when I first watched it, how surprised I was by it, because it wasn't how I expected a documentary about mountain biking to be. It was so much more. It was so much better. And I thank you guys so much for getting into those stories and talking to some of those folks that haven't been talked to before. And you're right, it's hard to build relationships with those guys. So well done. We have some questions coming in for you. Tempe asks, did you two ever seriously disagree on anything that went into this film? And where did the narrative come from?
Oh, that's... Galen, anything off the top? I'm probably the one who was putting the stuff out there that would be disagreed with, if I had to guess. So.
No, I was laughing a little bit when we played that last clip, because the first nugget of audio when you come into Act 2 narrative is your baby.
Yeah.
First came the cattle, then came the trail.
Yeah, it was the darling.
I wouldn't say we argued about that. That was just, you wanted that in there, and it was a good line, so there's no reason why it shouldn't have been in there.
Yeah, I think there was that, and I was really over the top into all the bikes that we shot in the studio right out of the gate. And I was pretty consistently trying to be like, let's put a bike here, let's put a bike there, you know, and we had to balance it out so that it wasn't just so that it flowed, you know. I found myself just kind of nerding out over all the bikes and wanting more to show more and more and more bikes, but also, you know, needing to be conscious of actually keeping some sort of flow to the story.
Yeah, I guess that might have been one of the only larger disagreements. You saw the light.
Yeah. The second part of that question, where did the narrative come from?
Right. Mm-hmm.
In terms of like the narration, or
yeah, just the development of that story overall, because it is, you know, it's that third voice that you know, is not typical of a documentary, I would think. So
mm-hmm.
the little more of the fun side, and I also want to know who you got to do that voiceover, because it's just impeccable.
Yeah. You know, that was I think right to the bitter end. At that the voiceover narration piece, you know, Galen and I collaborated on. My background is in writing, so I mean, I guess I took first crack at it. But you know, it changed. I mean, I don't even know how many versions.
Yeah, it's like
we ended up doing, and it was really just the result of a lot of back and forth, but also again, it was all inspired by the stories we were hearing from everybody we interviewed. So we were trying to channel that into a character like Al or Bob or Beach or whoever, looking back on their life and telling that story to somebody else. And so what would it sound like if you were to tell this story to your grandson? We tried to think in those terms, or your son, or just to anybody. And we tried to channel that, and we just tried to channel the stories of all the people we had talked to. And then
all the, you know, as far as like the scripts for all of them were pretty much just based off of, you know, several different stories that we heard throughout the interview process. The first one we probably took the most creative license on, but it's all was true to a lot of, you know, based on all the interviews we had. The second one was pretty heavily based off of a story from Dave Weens, where he was telling us a story about where he got lost in the woods, like so lost. He had a map with him, but he was just completely turned around. Because you know, and we talk about it in the doc, is, you know, you could be standing on the trail and not know it, because it was a trail from 20 years ago. It was an old CCC trail. So that's literally was where that came from, was a story of his where he was lost in the woods, and turns out, you know, somebody biked by him, and he was like 5 feet off the trail. And he just had no idea.
Yeah, and
so
it was
yeah,
it was a local character that Dave mentioned. I believe it was either Ethan. I think Ethan Passant. I think it's either Ethan or Jimmy Faust. One of the two.
It was Faust.
Was it Faust? Okay, that's who came like riding into the frame. He was like, "Hey, wait a minute!" Like, you know, so yeah, that was really a replica of that story.
How cool.
Yeah, and then we just pulled it all together through one voice. You know, again, you know, a lot of the folks in the early days didn't necessarily follow the sport through, but for the sake of the story, we kind of wove it together as if there was somebody who was in the early days and followed it all the way through.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Our next question from Eric: when and or where can we watch the whole thing again?
Yes,
I think you caught it at the film festival. So where's next?
Yeah, so we've done kind of the semi-typical short documentary route by going film festival circuit first. Right now, it's playing actually at the Kendall Mountain Film Festival. It's all virtual given this pesky COVID situation. So Kendall, it's playing at Kendall right now, and then starting on December 1st, it'll be part of Whistler Film Festival. And we're planning on a more kind of general like public release or launch. I think spring, early summer, if everything goes as planned.
Yeah, we're just gonna have to wait till it comes off the festival circuit. more or less,
Cool.
until we can launch it publicly.
Well, congrats. After a
But
3
yeah,
tour
so right now, if
pipeline,
you want to
it
watch
felt
it
really good.
today, it would be,
It is, yeah, because it was one of those things that it was that project that was just always there. um, when you woke up in the morning and went to sleep at night. And we did a lot of moonlighting, late night work on this, just because we're also, balancing the other duties we have for Buttery, our business. And so it's, certainly, became a passion project, to say the least.
So what's next, guys? What's next on the agenda, or another mountain bike film coming down the pipeline?
Funny you should ask, Nell. Uh, we're working on a sequel of sorts. I don't know if we'll call it Born from Junk or not, but we're picking back up in 1984, and we plan on taking it through mountain biking's debut at the Olympics in 1996. So I think initially we had a vision for this film, as you're seeing it now, to actually go from 74 all the way through the 90s. But like many things, we had to compromise a little bit and get the runtime down to make it a little more appealing for the film fest circuit and to fit in that short documentary zone a little better. So we've already done a ton of research on that next era, and a bunch of the initial shooting and stuff. So we plan on picking back up and carrying it on through until 1996.
Great. I look forward to that. God, I just had a question and then it disappeared from my head, but that's what it was. So I remember when you started doing this 3 years ago, and it was supposed to just be like a little, like short clips, right? To be able to be shared via social media and be less than 2 minutes and just catch people's attention and then move on. And so I think it's really awesome that you guys took this on and really dug into this story and did the work. You can tell just the way that you've told the story and the quality of this documentary really shows not only your passion for it and the topic, but the clear amount of legwork that you guys put into it in the back end. So congratulations on premiering and really seeing all that hard work come to fruition.
Thank you, Nell. And you obviously a huge help throughout the process, and put up with my slow email responses and all kinds of different things while I'd be begging you for help with tracking down images and things. So we really appreciate all your support and from everybody else at the museum too.
Hey, that is what we are here for. Is there any last thing that you guys want to tell us about the film before we call it a night?
I had one little thing I wanted to throw out there, and that was the Grub State Gang is not technically in the Mountain Bike Hall of Fame. And I would love to see them nominated. And so, Nell, I think I sent you a link to the Marin Mountain Bike Hall of Fame nominee page, which I could post in the chat too if I can track it down. But, these folks, their story is so amazing, and they were, I don't know, there's just the lack of, not caring, but capitalist motivation, or I don't know, it's just such a raw, just in the moment type of thing. And they didn't care about being recognized. And to me, they deserve recognition more than ever because of that. And so I would love to see the Grub State Gang nominated into the Mountain Bike Hall of Fame.
Cool. All right, I threw that link into the chat so everybody can go nominate right now.
Thanks, Mel.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Galen. Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to talk about your film with us this evening. And I look forward to being able to watch not only this film again, but your second and your part 2. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, everybody who joined us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out.
All right, just to remind everybody, go to CrestedButteMuseum.com if you would like to make a donation or become a member to support this program and all the other work we do. You can also find out more about the upcoming speakers at our Facebook page. That's where we really post updated information on who to expect week after week. Again, we've got Dwayne getting started at the end of January, so keep an eye out for that to be able to register for that series. And finally, we all get a break next week. It's holidays. Everybody enjoy your Thanksgiving, enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you all in a couple of weeks with our next speaker. Thank you so much and have a great night, everyone.